I don't like to think about teaching in that way. I see it more as a magical combination of personalities and interests, and I don't want to analyze the constituent elements. I prefer the magic to remain intact, and I hope that's not an answer that makes you think, gee, he's just trying to avoid the question, but it's actually an honest one. I don't know what works in my classroom, except when it's happening. I certainly know what doesn't work. Maybe I could answer the question a little bit in that way. What doesn't work is, I think, lecturing. I love lecturing, and that's what I did a lot in my UW days. But I really do think that the seminar table setup is one that works best when there's a free-flowing sharing of ideas and thoughts in an atmosphere that welcomes the inane as well as the sublime. What comes to mind is my first attempt to teach Russian literature. And as everyone knows, the loose, baggy monsters of Russian prose are minatory, to say the least. And scaling them requires a lot of fortitude. So that I was a little bit leery about offering a class one of my favorite novels, which is Anna Karenina, which is over 700 pages. Not to mention about the doings of aristocrats and who speak French among themselves, because that's what the Russian court did. But I decided that I was going to follow what I love, and if I love the book, I'm going to try to make others love it as well. And so there's no moment where I had a sudden epiphany that this is what makes teaching wonderful. But in retrospect, I think that is indicative of the type of experiences that make for those aha moments in teaching. I guess what Wordsworth said, poetry is motion recollected in tranquility. And in teaching, sometimes in the summer you think back past the hurly-burly and think about what actually worked. And what worked in that class was that my expectations were far exceeded. And in fact, they wanted to do a lot more than simply Anna Karenina. They wanted to do Crime and Punishment, which we did. So after reading 700 pages, we immediately plunged into a 600-page novel. And that is par for the course, perhaps in a college setting, but for high school students, even though they're seniors, and they're just spread so thin. And yet, the energy and passion they had for this literature was astounding. So I had the idea that I'm fascinated by the way in which film represents truth. I've always been interested in the theory of mimesis, and in particular documentary, the genre of documentaries. So I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could assign students to delve into selected documentaries and determine how the aesthetic effect conjoined or did not conjoin with the accuracy of the documentary. Well, they hated it. And I think one group really followed that particular project. The others did it, but they were, there's a great, Trotsky has a wonderful put down of an author. He was a book reviewer at one point, and he said, to read his prose is to drag a sandbag through a field of glue. And that's what I was effectively asking them to do. It wasn't their sandbag and it wasn't their field of glue, but they were stuck doing it. So at what point do you decide that it's not working? It worked great in your mind, but it's not working on the ground. What do? Well, you either stay with it and have a miserable experience, or decide, okay, everybody, you figure it out. What would you like to do? And indeed, that's what I did, and I got some great projects as a result. One girl did, a number of students went into what makes a controversial movie controversial, and they examined, Mel Gibson's treatment of Christ, for example. Others looked at censorship in American movies and whether the rating system can be seen as a form of censorship. So suddenly it had nothing to do with my original idea. So I think that I guess the lesson I would take from that is that if you can, and you have enough control to do it in your own course, just chuck something that's not working rather than continue on. So I'm faced with teaching Hamlet again to teenagers who don't particularly want to read Hamlet, even though they're aware of its prestige, which helps. And I'm thinking, well, how do I make it come alive to them? And I was talking to the drama teacher here, and Albin said, well, maybe you could get them walking around and spouting the lines off in the quad. And then we started thinking about it, and he has an advanced drama group here, Drama 3, and I thought, well, why don't we somehow bring them together? And that's what I did this morning. I didn't do anything. I sat in the background and nodded sagely, while the Drama 3 students had broken them up into the scenes that they wanted to do, and then they started to rehearse them, and it was fabulous. It was a synergy that one would not have predicted, I think. So it's those serendipitous moments that I think are sometimes the best, away from your set curriculum. It's called the Harkness table method, actually. It was, I had regular desks, and somebody said, well, why don't you try an oval table, see what happens. So Lakeside has the resources to build these things, and next, I walked in and there it was, and it's been interesting. I think one of the interesting aspects of a discussion class is what do you do with introverts? And introverts can't really hide at this table, whereas in a classroom they'll often migrate to the back. But that also is a philosophical question. So are you rewarding someone who's an extrovert simply because of their personality? So there's a balance there, and I think that this seminar setup actually allows kids more of a sense of, I can be myself. I'm not being lectured at. I don't have to formally raise my hand and respond. I can do it almost as if I were sitting across from someone in a coffee shop. And I know that Exeter has a very clearly articulated way of assessing people's performance at this table. I am much looser about it. For a kid who doesn't speak much, I'll often ask them to read something that they wrote as a way of getting their voice into the room. I think that's really important. See, the kids really focused on electronics. And so the pluses of that is that it eases some forms of discussion. There are online aspects to all my courses, and some of them, for instance, when I teach film, they do a reading in various articles on film. I'll ask them to respond with a paragraph, and then post that, and then their other assignment is to respond to someone else's.